Welcome to this very special edition of the KJ Masterclass Live, the show which ensures that you profit from your time spent here with experts, either through their industry insights, information, or simply learning from them. And today we have with us Katherine Barton, an author, spiritual guide, speaker, world traveler, has studied numerous spiritual traditions, working and studying many countries, helped her get through an unexpected and heartbreaking divorce. And that is where we learn from her her four-step spiritual framework to heal from divorce and reclaim your life with clarity and confidence, how to turn grief into growth, access deeper resilience, and craft a purpose-driven life beyond heartbreak. Welcome to the show, Katherine.
Thank you so much, Cash, and thank you for all the wonderful and courageous people that come on here. You have enormous variety, and I'm excited to be one of them. So thank you.
You are welcome. Welcome to the show, Katherine. Welcome to India in this online form. And I'm sure not just in India, but a lot of people across the globe will benefit from what we are going to learn from you. We'll be talking about how one can build a life after divorce. So this is one aspect. We'll also talk about several more things, including your book. But first, let's learn a bit about your journey, your background, your story, so that the audience knows directly from you who they are listening to.
Thank you. Well, I am not just starting out on the journey. I've been around for many, many decades. And I find myself more than anything else talking about the roots of my life. My father was a Methodist minister. And I grew up in the East Coast of the United States in New Jersey. And that really was the center of our life, actually, as a child. It became the spiritual, the church itself, the community. I actually have not only my father, but two grandfathers and a number of other great-grandfathers were also clergy people. So that was a big part of my life. And what I find is the older I get, the fact that that was the way I began is really defined very much who I am in my life. And I ended up actually, after I went to college at also a church, it was a church-related college that had a lot of, not so much a religious college, but it had a lot of very strong values about community and the importance of giving back to the where you actually lived. And I actually ended up in a community for 10 years following that did a lot of it. It had a very strong spiritual basis, but also a very strong community development basis. So back in the 60s and 70s, in those earlier days, there was a huge movement in the United States to do, community revitalization and that sort of thing. So I became part of that spiritual community and actually spent my career doing a lot of work in sort of spiritual, they would never call it at that time, but a lot of training in terms of corporations and organizations and also in communities. I remember one of the most exciting things I ever had happen was working with a local community in Texas where the people were technically illiterate. I mean, they couldn't read language, but they knew the structure of language. And it was so interesting talking to them really about the future of their community. That particular organization in 1976, which was the 200th anniversary of the United States, we did town meetings in every county in the United States, which is an amazing job. And it was a way to get to know people and to know really the spirit of this country and how really amazing it is, which is a great thing to remember in these current days. So then my career kind of went on and I wanted very much to be married. I married late in life in my 40s and really thought that this was kind of the answer to all of my dreams in every possible way. We ended up actually adopting a child as well, also late in life. And I thought the whole thing was perfect. And it was perfect because I had been trained to believe it was perfect. I, of course, from the church and also from society, the happily ever after, the fairy tales that we are raised with, that we couldn't possibly believe that could actually end, even though my own parents were divorced. So I actually ended up continuing to deepen my own spiritual journey, really in ways that I wasn't planning, but I did particularly a series of training with an indigenous tradition, an ancient Mayan tradition, actually. And what I got out of that is actually I could create my own story about my life. And I really got that I was being completely shackled and imprisoned by the ideas that I had been taught because they were no longer true for me. So with enormous enormous fear. I did leave my marriage, which was by far the hardest things I've ever done. And as I came out of that, I wanted people to know that it was possible to leave things that they thought they had to do in their life, things that they were imprisoning them, whether it was their job, whether it was where they lived, whether it was relationships they had. I felt very strongly that I wanted to let people know it was going to be okay. And so that's really why I ended up writing this particular book, Yearning for Love, A Reluctant Divorcee's Rocky Road to Nirvana, because I wanted people to understand that there is ultimately the reward of courage in life when you do something that's really, really hard. So that is really kind of how I ended up writing this book. I've continued to have multiple deepening spiritual journeys in my life. But that really is kind of the foundation of how I ended up actually writing this book and I'm in the career that I have right now, which is writing and speaking about this whole very important subject. So thanks for asking.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you for this, Catherine. To understand it, what is it that you are trying to tell the world? What is it that you want them to learn from you? We'll come to the book later, but through the work that you are doing, is it about, divorce is a very common thing in, at least in some parts of the world.
Right.
In some places it is unfortunate, but life is life. It happens in some places a bit more,
Right.
in some places a bit less. So why does one have to be, so afraid of it? Why do they? Because a lot of people, if I understand, especially in the Western world, in the US, they are earning for also themselves. Why do they still? It's not a case like in any other part of the world where less women are working. Many more women are working. What is it that they are afraid of when it comes to divorce? Are men also equally that much of afraid of this word called divorce? I want to understand from that perspective, who is more fearful, men or women?
That is a fantastic question. And I can't answer for the men. But I can answer for me. I think with women, first of all, you have, I think it's been shown, I don't have the current statistics, but I know bankruptcy is frequently part of divorce. First of all, for many, many people, the financial piece is very critical to people. I in the years I was thinking of my divorce, I was convinced I would be totally poverty stricken, and I was very lucky. I did have the financial resources to do this, but that's a real fear for people, I think. I think the other thing is the tearing up of the family. As from my perspective, our daughter was in high school when I had to make this decision, and it meant that I would lose her. And I talk about this. I thought a lot about losing him. I didn't think about losing her. And I lost her half time. I lost a companion to social events. And I live in the sort of conservative upper Midwest. I live in Minnesota, and I think maybe lesser so in other parts of the country, but there's sort of a status symbol about having a man in your life. You're so much of your identity. We are in a patriarchal society, and your identity is partially or somewhat or very defined by the kind of by being in a marriage and by being in a place that is a lot of our identity. A lot of people, I did not, but a lot of people lose their friends because they have friends in common, and the friends make a choice about who they're gonna go with. But I think it's ultimately, and the emotional support of a partner that has stood by me, and it was not lost on me that my husband had been very supportive to me in many, many ways. But we were just going to entirely separate paths, and there was no longer a road that we could go together. So I hope that those are some of the reasons that for me, the intimacy and the disappointment in myself that I couldn't make it work, that somehow I should have been able to make this thing work, and though I did everything I possibly could with many, many years of therapy and so forth, maybe disappointment in myself and accepting that, I think were very, very hard things. So those were some of the things I think that I would put at the top of the list.
Absolutely, absolutely. So what are the challenges once that inevitable thing, once you come to know that this is going to happen and it happens, then what? Should grief take over you, or independence take over you, rebuilding take over you? What should take over you at that point in time? Because this proceeding takes a bit of time. Does it leave you enough time to think post divorce, or is it that it just, it all, you leave it uh, to whatever way it happens? What is your suggestion here? How should people look at it whenever it happens, if at all it happens?
A great question. I think first of all, you have to deal with some practical things, like what are you going to continue to live together? Are you going to live apart? And that takes a lot of energy. One person is probably going to have to move out. Some people choose not to do that. For me, I could not. For me, I needed just physical separation, as many people do. I love that you mentioned grief. I think grief is enormous. And I think if people do not grieve after their divorce, I think they tend to make the same mistakes they made over and over again. And I think what is very universal about the book, although the word divorce is in the title, is everybody has to grieve about something. Often you see people where they immediately get involved with somebody else after a divorce. They kind of end up repeating the same patterns that failed in their relationship prior to that. So grief is, I could literally not walk. I could hardly walk across the room for several months. The grief was absolutely overwhelming. I also, when a family member got divorced, for 4 months, she couldn't even be on the phone. There were so many tears. And I actually think that's really healthy. I also, I wrote about the scenes when I cried in front of everybody. I cried in front of financial planners. I cried in front of shoe salesmen. I cried in front of anybody, car salesmen. I don't know that I suggest that for people, but I also think that if you don't grieve, I think you just bollocks it up inside, and it comes out in other ways that are probably a lot less healthy. I think I was lucky in that I did not have to. I had been running my own business at that time, so I had some flexibility about how I spent my time. I think it depends a lot on what you're actually facing. Some people have to get up and make money every day and go to work. And in some ways, that's a lot of really good things about that, because there's a role in which you're secure about. You still have a role that's still going to be there even after the relationship ends. So there's a lot of good things about that. You have to somehow make time for the grief. I had a friend that said every morning she would cry for 45 minutes. However, you can fit that into your life. I think that's really, really important. So the first 6 months were just, the grief, the logistics of getting apart, including I had a lot of issues with my daughter about dealing with how that was actually going to work with her. The physical, getting through all those physical things about how you're going to do money and those kind of things. And I think learning to create a support structure for yourself that's going to actually work, and what kind of spiritual practices, what kind of community practices, who's actually going to be there for you. I had one friend, actually, this was a healthcare provider, and she said, find 3 friends that for 30 minutes a day, every 3 friends that 30 minutes each every week, you can just be with them. Whether you can cry the whole time, you can talk, you can laugh, you can do whatever you want. That was actually critical to me, having people that I could go to and just be myself, whether it was usually crying. So those were the things that for me, that were really, really helpful.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Good you answered that. Because my next question would have been, generally when these sort of things happen, people want to seek validation. Who are these people with? Are they with me or not? And that is the time, that seeking of validation leads to more disappointment, that maybe people don't look at you that way. They have their own issues to resolve.
Right.
And, and that is where you talked about, you answered that who do you turn to? How do you find these friends? Because when you are into a marriage, you are so deep into it,
right.
You have common friends, they may not want to get involved. Where do you find this support, these 3 friends per, for, as you said, one friend a week? Where do you find this? Where is the family? How much do you seek support from family? Is there any other place to go? Not everyone is that much social. What is your advice on this? Have you mentioned about this in your book also?
Yeah, I'm particularly in the talks that I'm doing after it. That is a critical piece. That's so important. I had a therapist was one part. I had a therapist for several years on this particular topic, and finding the right therapist. I had been for many years in a women's group. We're actually now on our 30 years, so those women were actually critically important to me. Um, I a spiritual community, whether it's a church, it's a more informal spiritual group, a meditation group. Those people were absolutely critical to me. Um, and finding the people that are willing and able to listen. And they may not be the people that you watch, football matches with or not, but the people that have been the people that are willing to be with your authentic self. I actually lost a couple of friendships after that period of time because I chose the wrong person to go to. I mean, they were people that they just were not emotional people, and I just made them really uncomfortable. So there are always. I also think the people, and this is actually, I literally heard a voice right the day or so after I knew my marriage was over, and the voice said, the resources are always there. There's always people around that can listen and that want to listen to you. If you are willing to come forward with your authentic self, the right people are going to show up for you. But I'm really so important, this question, Kaj, because I know a lot of us do not have this kind of connections. I think some sort of a spiritual group, you're going to find the right people. 12-step groups in the United States are overwhelming. I'm not sure what they're like in India or a lot of other parts of the world, but those are people that have authentically dealt with a really tough thing about their life, some sort of a process or some sort of a substance addiction, and they know what it's like for things to go to the bottom. So some sort of spiritual group, I think, is probably the answer. And anybody you've cultivated over the years that you feel like is authentic, and is willing to talk about things that are not that easy. So I think particularly, I don't know, I think of India as being a much more community-minded country than ours is, but I think those kind of relationships are important to tend to, whether you're going to get divorced or not, because we always need people to talk to about things that are really important to us that are not easy.
Absolutely, absolutely. And attached with this is that one should self-reflect. What should be one's self-reflection at this point in time, without looking, self-blaming,
Yeah.
without getting into
Yes.
self-blaming? What is the best way to do that so that you get the right learnings, right experience, right things, so that you can move forward?
Again, I would go back to some sort of spiritual practice that honors the fact that we are divine and beautiful human beings, and the Sufis have a saying that the more problems you have, the more difficulties you face in life, the more God loves you. That to be able to continue those teachings, whether they're from Jesus or from Muhammad or from whoever your spiritual group or teachings is, there are huge teachings about that we are all loved and divine no matter what. So I would really so some sort of spiritual basis, meditation. There's many, even if online meditation groups. There's some wonderful groups there. Insight Timer is one app where there's people can follow you and relationships can come out of that. But that is so important. Also writing. That's basically why I ended up writing a book. And I really didn't realize, no kidding, until after it was out that I had written it to heal myself. And there's spiritual practices, writing, praying, and in all your honesty and authenticity, to be honestly angry that life didn't turn out the way you wanted. I think those are really, really important things and can help you enormously. There's some groups I know that have like listening partners. Some of the nonviolent communication groups have listening partners where you can actually talk about those kinds of things. I think we have enormous resources globally now, and that is the wonderful thing about the online and as technological connected we are, people that can play that role for you and can reflect back to you when you are falling in self-pity or you are actually in a place where you're actually willing to grow. So those are some of the things I think that might help people.
Absolutely, Catherine. Absolutely. Now, coming to the picking of the pieces, where do you get started? What is it that you should pick? What is it that you should leave at that point in time when you are going to restart?
Uh-huh. Boy, that's so great. I know a number of people that picked up and moved across the country. I think that's a great idea. I did not do that. um, it took me a while, but some things that like what physical objects of the marriage, like pictures and those sort of things, I think it's good to let those go as much as you can. I think one thing that you really need to hang on to, if this is true of your relationship, is that there was the love that was there. Like there was enormous love in my marriage. It was, and to remember that that's still there. And then he was a very deep and good friends. He actually passed away last fall, and I was actually there when he passed away. So that I held on to that love. I'm very happy about that. I've also been still continue to be related to my stepchildren, the children he has from his prior marriages, and I'm actually proud that that's worked well because we're very, very different. I think I think new relationships, deepening the relationships you have, like I was talking about before, but deepening those and particularly finding new hobbies. You've got more time on your hands. I'm actually a member of a local outdoors group here, and I think really half of them were formerly divorced women that you need different things to do. So what could be better than outdoors hiking and camping and things like that? A new pastime, I think, is really, really important, whether it's learning a language or something physical, I think, because you need to be in your body at these times. And it was important to me to stay in my house. We'd spend a lot of energy redoing my home. So I wanted to keep that because that was kind of a comfort place to me. But I think it's a combination of preserving that which is important and really been beautiful for you, but also to find things that you have a different energy with different people, and so that those are things that can help you grow into a whole different kind of life that you're creating for yourself.
Absolutely, absolutely, Catherine. Now about expectations.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people would want to live life fully, much more strongly, much more deeply after divorce, because there have been some people have lost out on living that life. Some
Mm-hmm.
people, in your case, you look about spiritualism, we talk about nirvana, so we'll come to that also. But for a lot of people, they want to live life fully. What should be their expectations from life, and when should they go, deep into it? Should it be immediately into it, or should they take, ginger steps into the future?
Well, one of the points whenever I do a talk about this that I make, and this is what really sustained me, is having a very positive image of the future, and that's whatever people want, whether it is, writing a book and getting it published, whether it is, adventure or travel, whether it's deepening of their career. I think it's a great time to create a fantastic image for yourself of what the future is going to be. And I think that image can sustain you even in those early days. And actually, interestingly enough, it was my ex-husband, as we were right after we decided that the marriage was over, he was the one that said, you keep your eye on the goal, keep your eye on the prize, keep your eye on the fact you are going to have a much more happy, independent life after this. And that is what you need to focus on. For me, part of it was an expectation of having having myself, because I really kind of given up myself in that relationship. And what I think, I'm sorry to say, what often happens in marriage is that we kind of mold into this thing that really is no longer fulfilling. So I didn't feel like there was a self there very much. So one of the biggest expectations and hopes and visions that I've had for myself is a very solid sense of my own dignity, my own brilliance, my own health, and my own vitality in a way that I never, ever had when I was married. I never had in my life before that. And that has been an extraordinary gift to myself. In fact, I was actually reading an article the other day where they said that sometimes for people, their happiest times in their life are their 70s, which is, I find kind of amazing. But I mean, to have kept the vision that what I really wanted and needed was a very strong, independent, a positive, independent nature where I didn't feel like I had to depend on somebody else to make me a full human being, which is unfortunately what I felt the whole time that I was married. So I think, create a vision and just go for it. And also know that the healing process is a long time. I had many, many people tell me that they thought it took about 7 years to recover from a divorce. I mean, many people. And I think, and actually, as I finished writing the book, which was, 10 years after my marriage had ended, I felt like I was still growing very deeply. So I think it allowed me to grow in a way that I never ever could have anticipated, and it's been nothing but wonderful. So.
Absolutely, absolutely, Catherine. What about identity? You have been with the earth, with your better half for a long enough of time, and your
Mhm.
identity, that's the way it is. Your identities get dissolved into the marriage so that it can become much more sublime. But every time it does not work like that. How do you pull back your identity from somewhere where it has dissolved so much? How do you
Mm.
do that? How do you build on that?
Well, I think actually one of the reasons why the marriage didn't work is because it became clear after a while that we were on two very different paths. And my path really was, a lot of it was spiritually based. So
Yes, Catherine. Um, yes,
hello?
yes,
I'm sorry
yes,
about that. I
Catherine.
don't.
No problem, no problem. Yeah,
Thank you. So it became very clear that, again, I had this spiritual um, discipline that I had been raised from. And so that was kind of always there. But then things just kept happening. Like I ran into, I don't know, many, many spiritual teachers along the way. This indigenous Mayan tradition. And then um, I also practiced Buddhism for a period of time. So, and then I think I was actually in many ways deepening an identity while we were still together. So, and I think that's when people talk about that that probably the one piece of advice that I've gotten about marriage that I think is really pretty foundationally true is you either grow apart or you grow together. And we were growing apart. And I think my spiritual identity was deepening enormously. But one of actually the thing that I came to understand as I was writing the book is I was never trained to be strong. And that was not who I was. I have some very early memories of my mother really basically telling me to be weak. And so the biggest wonderful surprise after all this is that realizing that I had a strength that I was never able to admit to myself. So that has been a beautiful thing for me to actually grow into, is a strength that I really was not conscious that I actually had. Now, the identity piece I think is absolutely critical. And I think that's one of the things people say after they leave a marriage is they really don't know who they are. Um, that is, I think, one of those things that is a lot of self-reflection and discipline and sometimes hard work, leaving behind the person that thought, for my case, it was, I thought I needed to fix everything, that he was the one that took care of an amazing amount of household things. He really kept the household running, both in terms of, financial records and tracking all that kind of thing. And he kept the container of the household going. For me to be totally responsible for running a household myself, that was an identity I didn't particularly want, but it was part of my realizing that I had to stand on my own 2 feet, and I didn't need to lean on somebody. I was really totally capable of doing these things myself. So I think that's one part of identity, is realizing how many things we are capable ourselves. If, for example, you're in a situation where you've always allowed your spouse to do all the social arrangements, where you're going to have to learn to do those kinds of things yourself. And those are things that you have to just set some goals, get some support, and try some new things. And I think that is why I think some physical distance from them, I think, is really very necessary and good, because if you're continuing to run into them all the time, it's really hard to find your own space and your own identity. So I think that goes back to some of the other things you talked about the new hobbies, of the new time, things that you actually get some joy out of that maybe you haven't really thought about for a lot, and to learn what gives you joy, which I think for many of those people that work really hard in life and achieve things, we kind of have forgotten about that. So I'm actually learning a lot how much I care about nature and having to learn different ways to be in it. So those are maybe a few things to get people started.
Absolutely, absolutely, Catherine. Now let's get to the book. When did this book idea come into your mind? Yearning for Love, a reluctant divorcee's rocky road to Nirvana. Awarded Kurskar Star for excellent nonfiction in January this year.
Well, it really was what I talked about earlier. It was that I felt like I had had a very my discovery about that I didn't have to be, and I thought what was I always thought I was sort of liberated, that I was a feminist and all that kind of stuff, and that I was, didn't really need men that much, and really, and what it boiled down to is when I got into a marriage with somebody that was supporting me financially, I just turned into a 1950s housewife, that I was totally happy to have him manage all these things. And even though I didn't consciously think I was like that, I really was like that. That all of these kind of these hidden stereotypes that you don't really realize you're carrying, but because we live in these societies, maybe the church, society, things we read, fairy tales, we believe those things. I really wanted people to understand that they didn't have to live like that. That they actually could give up an idea that seemed absolutely like was going to last the rest of your life. That really there was more courage and more fulfillment in letting go of something that was, even though it was really hard to give up. So that is really why I wrote it. So anyway, so I actually wrote a whole book several years after the divorce. And it was about my terrible marriage. It was about my terrible marriage, how it had gotten reconciled. And then ultimately it ended. Then my editor looked at it and she said, I have absolutely no idea why you were married to this guy. And she said another kind of, very bluntly. Then I I took a trip to Ireland with my daughter, graduated from college. And we ended up encountering this beautiful place in the middle of Ireland, which is called the Rock of the Sacred Feminine. And it's a very spiritual place and a lot of Celtic mythology around it. But after I came back from that trip, I realized that really wasn't what people needed to know about. What people needed to know about was, and this was now 7 or so years after the marriage, people needed to know about how had some confidence in growing after the marriage was over. They didn't need to know about a crummy marriage. So that was how I restarted the book, and that's ultimately the book that I ended up writing. Is how rocky the road is in finding strength. That you're really strong one day, and then the next day you're a blubbering idiot, and that's just kind of the way it is. It's not that it's better or worse, but life is not this little straight line that we would like to think it is of ascension. And I actually have gotten some very nice feedback from a number of therapists that they're actually giving it to their clients because they want their clients to understand that actually you are going to come out fine. It's not going to be easy, but as you actually, it's giving people the message that you really do, you can recover from very difficult things. When you can accept grief, you can learn to live things differently. So that's really what it came from, was a desire to share the fact that people actually could live out of their strength.
Right, right. And look, let's look at the solution. You talk about the four-step model framework for recovering from a divorce. Help us understand a bit about that.
Right. So the way I have it now, and it came from the book, is the first one was the resources are always there, which I said earlier, that I understood that, like, even if I would get in my mind a person to call, I would call them right away and they would somehow help me. And it came from people that showed up from no place that all of a sudden were helping me about this. I mean, even from like car mechanics that would be kind to me in days when I really, really needed it. The people started inviting me places that friendships that I had wanted over for a very long time turned up deepening. That when you're in a tough spot, the right people are going to show up for you. And whether it's people, I was very fortunate that financially things happened that I never ever could have anticipated. That confidence that life has resources, and instead of being all upset about the fact that's not going to happen, I would just say that's true. The second one is maintaining faith and a positive vision. The future is worth saving. Really and truly, it is going to get better on those most difficult days, and taking the time to craft a vision for yourself. It may change a lot. I think that's really, really important for you to have a picture of what it is that's going to be really wonderful for you. And I actually ended up designing a course on that called The Magic of True Intention. And it has people had wonderful little montages that they built about their futures. As I've talked about before, I think a spiritual practice is the bedrock of recovery. It could be anything, but something you do regularly. I'm now about 45, almost an hour a day in a practice that I'm working on that's really grounded in Sufism right now. But I've had other practices over time. I've changed over time. Meditation practices, anything that gets you quiet and out of the incredibly bad real estate of your mind is a good thing. And then also that knows there's a divine presence that will always sustain you and be your rock. And that will be there a lot longer than any partner or any friend. The last one is acknowledging the grief of a painful ending is both a challenging and a rewarding process. Really to keep, and the grief is so surprising and so difficult. And we don't want to admit it. I mean, I still have moments of grief about my ex who passed away, and you just wonder where is this coming from? Well, it's going to come, and to accept that and acknowledge it instead of pretending and trying to cover it up is really that's going to release you a lot more quickly. And there's many, and I would say, and many people agree with me on this, that I think that unfelt grief is, I think, one of the biggest things going on the planet today. If we could feel the grief, we would probably make a lot better decisions as a planet. So those are, I think, a fifth one I would add is really having a community. Some sort of community supports you. We talked about the three close friends, but people that you can call when you're down and when you're up. Really, really important to have those people. We are social beings. We need one another very badly. So that's a brief encapsulation.
Absolutely. There is much to learn about all this from you, Katherine, and I'm sure a lot of people, a lot of women especially, would want to connect with you, learn more from you, about you, from your book. What's the best way for them to do so?
Yeah, so the book is Yearning for Love. It's on the website. The website is kabarton.com. And you can order it there. And also, if you want to get a hold of me for speaking engagements or other kinds of counseling that I do with people.
Wonderful. With this, it's a wrap on this very special edition of the KJ Masterclass Live. Thank you so much indeed for joining us.
Thank you, Kaj, for such a wonderful hosting.